It was a typical Wednesday evening when Jane returned home earlier than usual. She had been busy at work, and her office had let her go a bit earlier than expected. As she opened the door to their cozy apartment, a familiar scent of fresh laundry lingered in the air. Her mind was already thinking about making dinner and spending a quiet evening with Mark, her partner of 3 years. The routine was comforting, yet something felt slightly off. Her mind began to wander, and she had an unsettling gut feeling. Shaking off the thought, she dropped her bag onto the counter and began pulling out ingredients for dinner. As she was prepping, she noticed Mark's phone sitting face down on the table, something he rarely left unattended. Normally, it was tucked away in his pocket, or he had it securely in his hand whenever they were home together. Out of curiosity, she glanced toward it. The screen lit up for a second, revealing a notification, just a fleeting glimpse of a text message that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. Jane furrowed her brow. Her mind raced. It was unlike Mark to leave his phone so openly, especially when they were together. He wasn't typically secretive, but it wasn't the first time she had felt something wasn't quite right. Still, she shook off the feeling. She had always trusted Mark. He was dependable, reliable, and loving. The relationship had felt solid and grounded. But as she returned to chopping vegetables, an unfamiliar unease tugged at the edge of her thoughts. Hours passed, and dinner went on as usual. Mark came home, kissed her on the cheek, and seemed his usual self, cheerful, laughing at something on the news, his eyes lighting up as he spoke about his day. But even as they sat across from each other, sharing small conversation, Jane couldn't shake that nagging feeling. Later that night, while Mark was in the shower, Jane decided to go on his phone. It felt intrusive, and she felt guilty even thinking it. But her curiosity had gotten the better of her. She needed answers. Slowly, she picked up the device and unlocked it. The passcode, thankfully, was still the same: his birthday, something simple and familiar. The first thing she noticed was the number of text messages, a constant stream of conversations she didn't recognize. The names weren't familiar either. She began scrolling through them, and each message seemed friendly, innocent at first glance. Yet, something about the exchanges felt strange, too casual, too playful. The messages weren't long, but they had an undertone she couldn't ignore. A tone of familiarity that shouldn't exist between strangers. Jane's fingers trembled slightly as she swiped through them, slowly piecing together that these weren't just friendly exchanges. There were repeated mentions of meeting up, plans that involved late-night calls and secretive chats. Her heart sank as her eyes scanned further. Then she found it an exchange between Mark and someone named Elle. A simple text read, "Looking forward to tonight," followed by a series of emojis that made her stomach churn. She clicked on the thread, her mind racing. It was clear now. Mark had been talking to someone he hadn't mentioned before. And it wasn't innocent. Her hands trembled as she sat back, processing what she had just found. It wasn't just harmless flirting, there were plans being made. It was clear that Mark had been hiding something from her. The betrayal hit her like a ton of bricks. All the memories, all the shared moments they had built together, all of it felt meaningless in that moment. The years they had spent as a couple, the trust she had placed in him, all crumbled in an instant. She stared at the phone, unable to believe what she had uncovered. But it was real. The evidence was right there, plain to see. The texts, the emojis, and the repeated confirmations of plans to meet someone she had never heard of. Fury bubbled up inside her. How could he do this? How could he lie to her for so long? Their relationship had always seemed so solid, so trustworthy. They had built their lives together, shared dreams, finances, and even talked about the future. But now, it all felt like a facade. Tears stung her eyes, and she wiped them away furiously. She couldn't believe how easily Mark had concealed this from her. How long had this been going on? How much of their time together had been a lie? She spent the next hour going through more messages, more proof that this wasn't a one-time mistake. There were dozens of interactions leading back several weeks, each one more damning than the last. The thought of Mark meeting this person behind her back, spending time with someone else, devastated her. By the time Mark emerged from the bathroom, towel drying his hair, Jane quickly shoved the phone back onto the table and turned away, pretending nothing had happened. But her mind was racing, her heart pounding. How could she face him now? Mark walked over to the table, his eyes sparkling with amusement as he noticed her silence. "Hey," he said, leaning in to give her a kiss on the forehead. "What's wrong? You seem quiet tonight." Jane forced a smile, shaking her head slightly. "Nothing, just tired." Mark sat across from her, clueless, unaware of the storm that was brewing in her mind. But it was only a matter of time before she had to confront him. The following morning, Jane woke up feeling more restless than ever. Her mind kept replaying everything: the messages, the lies, the secret plans. She couldn't shake the sinking feeling in her chest. How could she continue to live under the same roof as someone who had betrayed her so deeply? The more she thought about it, the more certain she became she couldn't stay silent. She had to confront Mark. As the morning unfolded, Jane tried to act as normally as possible, going about her routine of making coffee, preparing breakfast, and getting ready for work. But beneath the surface, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, spiraling into anger and disbelief. She knew she couldn't let things continue as if nothing had happened. She needed answers, and she wasn't leaving the conversation without clarity. Mark, as usual, seemed completely unaware of the storm brewing inside her. He kissed her on the cheek and casually asked, "You okay, babe?" His face was as cheerful as it usually was, but for Jane, it was infuriating. How could he act so normal when everything had changed overnight? "I'm fine," she replied, plastering a weak smile on her face. "Just a bit tired." Mark shrugged, taking a seat at the table, his focus already on his phone, scrolling through messages. She could see the familiar comfort of his routines, unconcerned, carefree, lost in his own world. But she wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. After a few minutes of pretending to engage in casual conversation, Jane finally cleared her throat and looked directly at Mark. She wasn't sure how to begin, but her voice carried a steady resolve. "Mark, we need to talk." Mark glanced up from his phone, his expression immediately shifting to curiosity. "Yeah? What's on your mind?" Jane took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. This wasn't going to be an easy conversation, but she had to face it head on. "Last night, I went through your phone," she admitted, her voice steady but firm. "I found the messages." For a moment, Mark just stared at her, confusion clouding his face. "Messages? What messages?" "You know what I'm talking about," Jane continued, her heart pounding. "The texts with that person. The ones where you talked about meeting up. The ones where you planned to..." She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence, her voice breaking slightly. Mark's eyes narrowed. Wait a minute. You went through my phone?" "Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about," Jane shot back, feeling her anger rise. "You've been talking to someone behind my back, planning things without me, meeting up with someone, sneaking around." Mark's expression shifted, and suddenly he seemed defensive. "It's not what you think, Jane. It's not like that." "It is like that," Jane snapped, interrupting him. "Don't lie to me, Mark. I saw the messages. I saw everything." Mark leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as he sighed heavily. "Look, yes, I've been talking to someone, but it's not..." He stopped himself, clearly struggling to find the right words. "It's not what you think. It's just someone I've been talking to. Nothing serious." Jane's eyes burned with disbelief. "Nothing serious? You've been meeting this person, making plans, and you think it's nothing serious?" "I didn't intend for it to go this far," Mark tried to justify, but his tone lacked conviction. "It's just something casual. It didn't mean anything. I didn't want you to find out, okay? I messed up." "Messed up?" Jane's voice rose, frustration pouring out. "You didn't want me to find out? You think that makes it okay? You think cheating is just a mistake?" "No," Mark blurted out, leaning forward slightly, his voice now sharp. "It's not like that. I messed up, yes. I didn't mean to hurt you. I wasn't thinking clearly. But it didn't mean anything." Jane's chest tightened. "Didn't mean anything? You expect me to believe that? How long has this been going on, Mark? How long have you been hiding this from me?" "I didn't mean to hurt you," Mark repeated, his voice softer now. "It was just a moment of weakness. I thought I could handle it on my own. A moment of weakness? Jane's voice broke, the sting of his betrayal sinking in deeper. 3 weeks? 4? How long have you been hiding this? I didn't mean to lie, Mark tried again, but Jane cut him off. It doesn't matter, she snapped. You lied. You hid it from me. You chose to keep this from me while we built a life together, while we shared everything. And now you expect me to believe it's nothing. Mark stood up, running a hand through his hair, frustration evident on his face. It's not like I wanted to hurt you, okay? I thought I could end it. I didn't think it would blow up like this. Jane stared at him, incredulous. You thought you could end it? After you've been planning to meet this person behind my back? I didn't plan to hurt you. Mark raised his voice slightly. It was stupid. It was a mistake. It meant nothing. But Jane's fury was beyond words now. A mistake? Is that all you have to say? That it was a stupid mistake? I'm sorry. Mark finally admitted, his voice quieter now, his eyes pleading. I'm sorry, Jane. I never meant to hurt you. I don't want to lose you. Jane clenched her fists. You're sorry now? You're sorry after you've broken everything we built together? Mark stepped closer, reaching out to touch her arm, but Jane flinched away. The betrayal had cut too deep. Please, don't walk away. Let me make it right. No, Jane whispered, shaking her head slowly. You don't get to make it right. You broke something I don't know if I can ever fix. Mark's face fell, his gaze dropping to the floor. I messed up. I never wanted it to get this far. Jane stared at him, the anger still simmering beneath the surface, but now mixed with overwhelming pain. I can't do this, Mark. I can't live with someone who lies to me, who betrays me. Mark's eyes filled with regret. Please, don't go. I love you. I've messed up, but I can fix this. Jane took a step back, tears welling up in her eyes. No, Mark. You don't get to fix this. You can't take back what you've done. The trust. It's gone. For a moment, silence stretched between them. The weight of their shared life, the plans, the dreams, the future now felt like it had crumbled in an instant. The life they had built together, so full of shared moments and memories, felt empty and hollow. I'm done, Jane finally said, her voice firm. I can't keep living with this. I need space. I need time to figure things out. Mark's face paled. You're serious. You're leaving? Yes, Jane replied, her voice shaking. I can't stay here anymore. Mark opened his mouth to protest, to beg, but Jane shook her head. It's over, Mark. It's really over. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Mark standing in stunned silence. The man who had promised forever, who had sworn to be faithful, had betrayed her, and now she was walking away, her heart breaking as she prepared to rebuild her life without him. The days that followed were a whirlwind for Jane. After leaving Mark, she immersed herself in a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, heartbreak, and confusion all at once. She had moved out of their apartment, staying with a close friend while she tried to make sense of everything. The walls that had once provided security now felt cold and empty without Mark's presence. Yet, despite the ache in her heart, she knew she couldn't go back, not after what she had uncovered. It wasn't just the betrayal itself, it was everything that followed. The betrayal was one thing, but Mark's insistence on fixing it made things more complicated. Every day, he sent countless texts and left voicemail messages, apologies, heartfelt cries of regret, promises to change, promises to win her back. At first, Jane didn't respond. But as the days went by, she found herself thinking, what should she do now? Her mind swirled with options. She wasn't the type to make impulsive decisions, but every passing minute felt like a battle between staying angry and allowing herself to be vulnerable again. Could she forgive Mark? Could she allow herself to trust him again? Could she move on and start over without him? She thought about the advice her friends had given her. Some said she should forgive. Others warned her not to give him a second chance. People make mistakes, her closest friend, Lisa, had told her. Maybe he truly regrets it. Maybe he'll never do it again. But was that enough? Could she trust Mark to keep his word? Could she risk it? Jane knew she had to decide, and fast. The clock was ticking, and every moment that passed made her more aware that her life couldn't stay stagnant. She couldn't be the same person she had been before. She couldn't just go back to normal, it wasn't that simple. The idea of forgiveness kept weighing heavily on her mind. She thought about how good things had once been between them, how they had shared so much, built dreams together, laughed and comforted each other. Could she let that go? Could she believe in a future where she could forgive him and trust again, or was it too soon? One night, Jane sat alone on the balcony of her friend's apartment, staring at the city lights that spread out below. Her phone buzzed another message from Mark. Her heart ached as she glanced at the screen. He was reaching out again, apologizing once more, begging her to meet him, to talk. She knew she couldn't ignore it much longer. Her fingers hovered over the reply button, but she stopped herself. Was she ready to engage? Could she bring herself to face him? And if she did, what would she even say? Was this the moment where she should finally tell him how hurt she was, or should she ask him to leave her alone? For a long time, Jane stared at the glowing screen, her thoughts spinning. Finally, she made up her mind. She decided to meet with Mark. Not to forgive him immediately, not to say things would go back to the way they were, but to get some clarity. She needed to see him face to face, hear him out, and determine if he was serious, if he truly regretted what he had done, or if this was just more empty words. The next day, they agreed to meet at a small cafe near Jane's new apartment. When Jane arrived, she saw Mark already sitting at a corner table, nervously fidgeting with his phone. He looked different, tired, sad, maybe even humbled. For the first time, there was no arrogance in his posture, no confident smile on his lips. Just genuine sorrow etched across his face. As she approached, Mark's eyes lifted and his face lit up briefly. Then his smile faded as he saw the determination in Jane's expression. She wasn't there to listen to more excuses. "Hi," Mark greeted softly, his voice breaking slightly. "Thank you for coming." Jane sat down across from him, studying his face carefully. Her heart pounded, but she kept her expression neutral. "You wanted to talk," she said quietly, her voice calm but firm. "So talk." Mark swallowed hard, and for a moment he seemed unsure where to begin. I didn't know how to make things right," he admitted after a long pause. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could handle it on my own, but Stop, Jane interrupted, shaking her head slightly. "I don't want excuses, Mark. I want the truth." Mark nodded, as if finally accepting that she wasn't going to let him off the hook. "You're right. I messed up. I made a huge mistake. I didn't think about the consequences, how it would affect you. I wasn't thinking about anything except what I wanted at the moment." Jane crossed her arms, leaning back in her chair. "So why should I believe you now? Why should I believe you've really changed? You've apologized before." "I'm different now," Mark said, his voice shaking slightly. "I've thought about everything I've lived through, what it feels like to lose you. I don't want to go through that again. I've realized how much I've taken you for granted. You're the most important person in my life." Jane studied him for a long moment. Her instincts told her to be skeptical. So much of what he was saying felt rehearsed, practiced. But there was something in his eyes, an intensity that seemed genuine. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice low. "Why did you start talking to that person?" Mark exhaled deeply, running a hand through his hair. "It was stupid. It was like I got caught up in something I couldn't control. It wasn't about love, it was just attention. A way to feel wanted when I wasn't feeling enough in our relationship." Jane raised an eyebrow, her voice sharp. "So you were looking for validation? You thought cheating would make you feel better?" Mark's face fell. "It wasn't like that. I wasn't thinking straight. I didn't realize what I had until it was almost too late. You're everything I want." "And now what?" Jane asked coldly. "What happens now? Do you expect me to just trust you again after everything?" "I'm asking for a chance," Mark replied, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I'm asking you to give me the opportunity to show you that I'm willing to change. I don't want to lose you." Jane let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Change? That's a big word, Mark. Do you really think you can change that easily? Do you really believe one apology is enough to fix this? Mark's eyes softened, but his resolve didn't waver. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll prove to you that I'm serious. I love you, and I'm willing to fight for us. Jane sat silently, watching him carefully. Her mind spun. This was no longer just about hurt. It was about decisions. Did she want to move forward with Mark, or was it already too late? Could she ever truly trust him again? Could she forgive the betrayal? After a long silence, she finally spoke. I need time, Mark. I need to figure out if this is what I want, if I'm even capable of forgiving you. Mark's face fell slightly, but he nodded. Take all the time you need. I'm here waiting for you. As they stood to leave, Jane looked at him one last time, her heart pounding. She knew this wasn't just about forgiveness, this was about rebuilding something shattered. And she wasn't sure if it could ever be whole again. The weeks after their meeting at the cafe passed in a blur. Jane immersed herself in her daily routine work, errands and socializing with friends, anything to distract herself from the relentless thoughts swirling in her mind. She kept Mark's messages at arm's length, only occasionally glancing at his texts, unsure whether to respond or ignore him altogether. She still wasn't sure what she wanted, whether she should give him a chance, walk away completely, or try to work through the pain. In the back of her mind, she knew the decision wouldn't come easily. It would require facing hard truths about herself, about Mark, and about what she truly wanted for her future. The betrayal had shaken her to her core, and she couldn't help but feel like she had lost a part of herself she wasn't sure how to get back. But there was something about the way Mark had looked at her that night, the genuine vulnerability, the rawness in his eyes that kept her from dismissing him entirely. Still, she couldn't forget the betrayal. It lingered, an undeniable weight pressing on her chest. The trust she thought they shared was now fractured, and no matter how much he apologized or tried to convince her, she couldn't erase the memory of those hidden messages, those late-night plans he made with someone else. Every time she closed her eyes, she relived that moment, the moment she found out he had been lying to her. One evening, Jane sat on the couch in her friend's apartment, staring at the reflection in her phone screen. Mark's name blinked on the messaging app, waiting for a reply. She let out a long sigh, wondering what to say. Did she want to give him another chance? Could she ever really trust him again? Her friend Lisa, who had been a quiet observer of her heartbreak, noticed the tense silence. So what's your plan? Lisa finally asked, taking a seat across from her. Are you going to talk to him again? Jane looked at her phone, then glanced back at Lisa. I don't know. Part of me wants to just leave everything behind and never speak to him again. But part of me still wants to know if he's serious about making it right. Lisa nodded thoughtfully. That's the hard part, isn't it? Knowing whether you're wasting your time or if he really means it. Jane's eyes shifted to the window, where the city lights glimmered outside. I thought I knew him. I thought we were building something real. And now, I don't even know what to believe anymore. Lisa reached out, placing a comforting hand on Jane's arm. Sometimes you have to decide what's best for you, what will make you happy, even if it means letting go. Those words stuck with Jane. It wasn't just about Mark, it was about her own happiness. Could she rebuild her life with someone who had hurt her so deeply? Or did she deserve something more? A few days later, Jane decided to take the plunge. She agreed to meet with Mark again, this time at a nearby park. The evening air was cool. The autumn leaves scattered across the ground, a stark contrast to the heavy weight she carried inside. When she arrived, she saw Mark already sitting on a bench, nervously adjusting his sleeves. He looked more composed than before, calm, but still visibly anxious. As she approached, Mark stood up, and their eyes locked. For a brief moment, it felt like they were the only two people in the world, their shared history, the pain and the possibility of what could come next, all condensed into that single, pregnant moment. Hi, Mark said, his voice soft. Hi, Jane replied, giving him a tight smile but keeping her distance. Mark took a deep breath before speaking. I've been thinking about what you said about needing time to figure things out. Jane nodded, watching him closely. I've had a lot of time to think. Mark's expression grew more serious. I'm sorry for everything, for lying to you, for hurting you. I never wanted any of this. I realize now how much I took you for granted. I didn't see what I had until it was almost too late." Jane felt her heart tighten at his words. For a brief moment she allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe he had truly reflected on what he did. Maybe this was his real attempt to make amends. But could she trust that this was enough? "What do you want, Mark?" Jane finally asked, her voice steady but cautious. "What do you expect me to do now?" Mark's eyes locked on hers, and there was an intensity in his gaze that hadn't been there before. "I want another chance. I want to prove to you that I'm not the person I was. I want to show you I can be the man you deserve, the man you've always known." Jane sighed, looking down at the ground briefly before turning back to him. "It's not that simple, Mark. You can't just erase what happened. You can't just fix this with words." "I know," Mark said firmly. "I'm willing to show you through my actions. I'll do whatever it takes to prove it. I'll change." "You keep saying that," Jane replied, "but change takes time. It takes effort, and it doesn't happen overnight. Can I trust that you'll really do the work?" Mark stepped closer, his voice becoming more earnest. "I'll do anything for you if you'll give me a chance." Jane considered his words carefully. She knew she had to make a choice, either to believe him, to take a leap of faith, or to walk away and accept that the relationship had been forever broken. But as she looked at Mark, his genuine expression softened her resolve, making her waver. Could he truly change? "I want to believe you," Jane said slowly, "but I'm not sure if I can." Mark reached out gently, his fingers brushing hers. "Give me a chance. I'll prove it to you." For a long moment, Jane stared at their hands, torn between her hurt and the lingering hope that maybe, just maybe, Mark had truly learned his lesson. She knew this wasn't going to be easy. She couldn't expect things to go back to the way they were. But what if this could be the beginning of something new? A chance to rebuild, not from what had been lost, but from what had been learned. Finally, Jane looked up at Mark, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay, I'll give you one chance. But only one. You need to show me that you're serious, and it won't be easy." Mark's eyes lit up with relief and gratitude. "Thank you. I promise I'll prove it." As they walked away from the park, Jane's heart fluttered. She had chosen to give Mark a second chance, but deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of a long journey, one that would be filled with tests, trials, and difficult decisions. Could they really move forward together after everything? Only time would tell. But for now, she was willing to try. For now, she was willing to believe.